Assalamualaikum, hi guys. It's been a while since I come up with any video, so I'm back again with another chapter to cover this week, and today I will be talking about power and politics. In this chapter, we show that power determines what goal people want to achieve, discuss how power works in organizations, and reveal the effects of political behavior. We begin by exploring our natural association of power with leadership. In OB, power refers to a capacity that someone, let's say A, has to influence the behavior of B so B acts in accordance with A's wishes. Someone can therefore have power but not use it. It is a capacity or potential. Probably the most important aspect of power is that it is a function of dependence. The greater B's dependence on A, the greater A's power in the relationship. Dependence, in turn, is based on alternatives that B perceives and the importance B places on the alternatives A controls. A person can have power over you only if he or she controls something you desire. For example, if you want a college degree and have to pass a certain course to get it, and your current lecturer is the only faculty member in the college who teaches that course, she therefore has power over you because your alternatives are highly limited and you place a high degree of importance on the outcome. Leaders use power as a means of attaining group goals. So do you think leadership and power are different? Actually, yes. Power does not require goal compatibility, just dependence. Leadership, on the other hand, requires some consistency between the goals of the leader and the followers. A second difference relates to the direction of influence. Leadership research focuses on the downward influence on followers. It minimizes the importance of lateral and upward influence patterns. Power research takes all factors into consideration. For a third difference, leadership research often emphasizes style. It seeks answers to questions such as how supportive should a leader be and how much decision-making should be shared with followers. In contrast, the research on power focuses on tactics for gaining compliances. And lastly, leadership concentrates on the individual leader's influence, while the study power acknowledges that groups as well as individuals can use power to control other individuals or groups. Where does power come from? And what gives an individual or a group influence over others? We answer this by dividing the bases or sources of power into two general groupings, formal and personal power, and we'll break each of these down into more specific categories. Formal power is based on an individual's position in an organization. It can come from the ability to coerce or reward, or from formal authority. Coercive power is a power base that is dependent on fear of the negative results from failing to comply. The opposite of coercive power is reward power, with which people comply because it produces positive benefits, and someone who can distribute rewards others view as valuable will have power over them. These rewards can be financial or non-financial, such as recognition, promotions, or interesting work assignments. Legitimate power, on the other hand, is the power a person receives as a result of his or her position in the formal hierarchy of an organization. Legitimate power is broader than the power to coerce and reward. Specifically, it includes members' acceptance of the authority of a hierarchical position. Apart from formal power, we also have personal power, which can come in the form of expertise and the respect of others. Personal power is not mutually exclusive from formal power, but it can be independent. Expert power is influence wielded as a result of expertise, special skills, or knowledge. As jobs become more specialized, we become dependent on experts to achieve goals. And reference power is based on identification with a person who has desirable resources or personal traits. If I like, respect, and admire you, you can exercise power over me because I want to please you. So, reference power develops out of admiration of another and a desire to be like that person. Of the three bases of formal power, coercive, reward, and legitimate, and two bases of personal power, expert and referent, which do you think are the most important sources of power? Well, research suggests the personal sources of power are actually the most effective. Both expert and referent power are positively related to employee satisfaction, their organizational commitment, and their performance. Meanwhile, legitimate and reward power seem to be unrelated to these outcomes. And one source of personal power, which is coercive power, can sometimes be damaging. The most important aspect of power is that it is a function of dependence. In this section, we show how understanding dependence helps us understand the degrees of power. Let's begin with a general postulate, which is the greater B's dependence on A, the more power A has over B. So when you possess anything others require that you alone control, you make them dependent on you, and therefore you gain power over them. As the old saying goes, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is the king. So the more you can expand your own options, the less power you place in the hands of others. This explains why most organizations develop multiple suppliers rather than give their business to only one. It also explains why so many people aspire to financial independence. Independence reduces the power others can wield to limit our access to opportunities and resources. What actually creates dependence? Dependence increases when the resource you control is important, scarce, and non-substitutable. So first, let's look at importance. If nobody wants what you have, it's not going to create dependence. However, note that there are many degrees of importance, from needing the resource for survival to wanting a resource that is in fashion or adds to convenience. The second one is scarcity. We see the scarcity-dependence relationship in the power situation of employment. Where the supply of labor is low relative to demand, workers can negotiate compensation and benefit packages far more attractive than those in occupations with an abundance of candidates. For example, college administrators have no problem today finding English instructors since there is a high supply and low demand. The market for network system analysts, in contrast, is comparatively tight, with demand high and supply limited. The resulting bargaining power of computer engineering faculty allows them to negotiate higher salaries, lighter teaching loads, and other benefits. And the third factor is non-substitutability. The fewer viable substitutes for resource, the more power a person controlling that resource has. At universities that value faculty publishing, for example, the more recognition the faculty member receives through publication, the more control that person has because other universities want faculty who are highly published and visible. Alright, so now let us look at what power tactics do people use to translate power bases into specific action, and what options do they have for influencing their bosses, co-workers, or employees. Research has actually identified 9 distinct influence tactics. So we can see in the slide here, the first one is what we call legitimacy. This is relying on authority position or saying a request in accordance with organizational policies or rules. And the second one, we have rational persuasion, which is presenting logical arguments and factual evidence to demonstrate that a request is reasonable. Next, we have inspirational appeals, which refers to developing emotional commitment by appealing to a target's values, needs, hopes, and aspirations. We also have consultation, which is increasing support by involving the target in deciding how to accomplish the plan. And next, we have exchange, which is rewarding the target with benefits or favors in exchange for acceding to a request. And next, we have personal appeals, which is asking for compliance based on friendship or loyalty. And we also have ingratiation, which is using flattery, praise, or friendly behavior before making a request. So this is a technique in which an individual attempts to influence another person by becoming more likable to their target. And we also have pressures by using warnings, repeated demands, and threats. And finally, we have coalitions, which is enlisting the aid or support of others to persuade the target to agree. So we have looked at the power tactics just now. So we have to understand that some tactics are actually more effective than others. Rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, and consultation tend to be the most effective, especially when the audience is highly interested in the outcomes of the decision process. The pressure tactic tends to backfire and is typically the least effective of the nine. You can increase your chance of success by using two or more tactics together or sequentially as long as your choices are compatible. Using ingratiation and legitimacy together can also lessen the negative reactions, but only when the audience does not really care about the outcome of the decision process or the policy is routine. So the effectiveness of some influence tactics actually depends on the direction of influence and of course on the audience. It is also important to understand that preference for power tactics varies across cultures. Those from individualist countries tend to see power in personalized terms and as a legitimate means of advancing their personal ends, whereas those in collectivist countries, especially Asian countries, see power in social terms and as a legitimate means of helping others. A study comparing managers in the US and China found that US managers prefer rational appeal compared to Chinese managers who prefer coalition tactics more. Reason-based tactics are consistent with the US preference for direct confrontation and rational persuasion to influence others and resolve differences, while coalition tactics align with the Chinese preference for meeting difficult or controversial requests with indirect approaches. At this point, we have discussed what power is and how it is acquired, but we've not yet answered one more important question. Does power actually corrupt? There is certainly evidence that there are corrupting aspects of power. Power leads people to place their own interests ahead of others' needs or others' goals. And why does this happen? Interestingly, power not only leads people to focus on their self-interest because they can, it also sets them free to focus inward and therefore come to place greater weight on their own aims and interests. And that's not all. Powerful people react especially negatively to any threats to their competence. People in positions of power hold on to it when they can, and individuals who face threats to their power are exceptionally willing to take actions to retain it, whether their actions harm others or not. So those given power are more likely to make self-interested decisions when faced with a moral hazard. People in power are also willing to criticize other people negatively, and power also leads to overconfidence in decision making. I have mentioned power does appear to have some important disturbing effects on us, and one of them is sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is defined as any unwanted activity of a sexual nature that affects an individual's employment, or creates a hostile work environment. Generally, sexual harassment is more prevalent in male-dominated societies. Sexual harassment is disproportionately prevalent for women in certain types of jobs. In the restaurant industry, for instance, 80% of female waitresses reported having been sexually harassed by coworkers or customers compared to 70% of male waiters. Most studies confirm that power is central to understanding sexual harassment. This seems true whether the harassment comes from a supervisor, coworker, or employee, and sexual harassment is more likely to occur when there are large power differentials. The supervisor-employee dyad best characterizes an unequal power relationship where formal power gives the supervisor the capacity to reward and coerce. Because employees want favorable performance reviews and salary increases, supervisors control resources most employees consider important and scarce. When there are not effective control to detect and prevent sexual harassment, abusers are more likely to act. Sexual harassment can be detrimental to individuals and the organizations, but it can be avoided. Therefore, the manager's role is very critical. They should make sure an active policy defines what constitutes sexual harassment, informs employees that they can be fired for inappropriate behavior, and establishes procedures for making complaints. They should also reassure employees that they will not encounter retaliation if they file a complaint. Managers should also investigate every complaint and inform the legal and HR departments of the organization. They should also make sure offenders are disciplined and terminated, and set up in-house seminars to raise employee awareness of sexual harassment issues. So in short, the bottom line is that managers have a responsibility to protect their employees from a hostile work environment. They may be easily unaware that one of their employees is being sexually harassed, but being unaware does not protect them or their organization. If investigators believe a manager could have known about the harassment, both the manager and the company can be held liable. Whenever people get together in groups, power will be applied. People in organizations want to establish a niche to apply influence, earn rewards, and advance in their careers. If they convert their power into action, we describe them as being engaged in politics. Political behavior is defined as activities that are not required as part of a person's formal role in the organization, but that influence or attempt to influence the distribution of advantages and disadvantages within the organizations. Political behavior is outside specific job requirements. It requires some attempt to use power bases. It includes efforts to influence the goals, criteria, or processes used for decision making. Our definition is broad enough to include variety of political behaviors such as withholding key information from decision makers, joining a coalition, whistleblowing, spreading rumors, leaking confidential information to the media, exchanging rewards with others for mutual benefit, and lobbying on behalf of or against a particular individual or decision alternative. In this way, political behavior is often negative, but not always. Now that I've explained the constant presence of politicking in organizations, let us now look at the causes and consequences of this behavior. First, let us focus our attention to the factors contributing to political behavior. At the individual level, researchers have identified certain personality traits, needs, and other factors likely to be related to political behavior. In terms of traits, we find that employees who are high self-monitors, possess an internal locus of control, and have a high need for power are more likely to engage in political behavior. The high self-monitor is more sensitive to social cues, exhibit higher level of social conformity, and is more likely to be skilled in political behavior compared to those who have low self-monitor. Because they believe they can control their environment, Individuals with an internal locus of control are more prone to take a proactive stance and attempt to manipulate situations in their favor. Besides that, an individual's investment in the organization and perceived alternatives also influence the degree to which they will pursue illegitimate means of political actions. The more a person expects increased future benefits from the organization, and the more that person has to lose if forced out, the less likely he or she is to use illegitimate means. An individual with low expectation of success from political means is also unlikely to use political behavior. Finally, some individuals engage in more political behavior because they simply are better at it. Such individuals read interpersonal interactions well, fit their behavior to situational need, and excel at networking. These people are often indirectly rewarded for their political efforts. Although we acknowledge the role individual differences can play, the evidence more strongly suggests that certain situations and cultures promote politics, specifically when an organization's resources are declining, when the existing pattern of resources is changing, and when there is opportunity for promotions, politicking is more likely to surface. When resources are reduced, people may engage in political actions to safeguard what they have. Also, any changes, especially those implying significant reallocations of resources within the organizations, are more likely to stimulate conflict and increase politicking. Cultures characterized by low trust, role ambiguity, unclear performance evaluation systems, zero-sum, reward allocation practices, democratic decision-making, high pressure for performance, and self-serving senior managers will also create breeding grounds for politicking. Because political activities are not required as part of the employee's formal role, the greater the role ambiguity, the more employees can engage in unnoticed political activity. Role ambiguity means the prescribed employee behavior that is not clear. Therefore, fewer limits to the scope and functions of the employee's political actions can contribute to political behavior. The more an organizational culture emphasizes the zero-sum or win-lose approach to reward allocation, the more employees will be motivated to engage in politicking. The zero-sum approach here is an approach that treats the reward pie as fixed, such that any gains by one individual are at the expense of another. There are also political forces at work in the relationships between organizations where politics work differently depending on the organizational cultures. When two organizations with very political environments interacted with one another, the political interactions between them hurt performance in collaborative projects. On the other hand, when companies with less internal political behavior interacted with one another, even political disputes between them did not lead to lower performance in collaborative projects. So how do people respond to organizational politics? The exhibit 13.4 here summarizes the extensive research on the relationship between organizational politics and individual outcomes. There is very strong evidence indicating that perceptions of organizational politics are negatively related to job satisfaction. The perception of politics leads to anxiety and also stress. When it gets too much to handle, sometimes employees may quit the job. When employees see politics as a threat, they often respond with defensive behaviors. These include reactive and protective behaviors to avoid action, blame, or change. In the short run, employees may find that defensiveness protects their self-interest, but in the long run, it wears them down. People who consistently rely on defensiveness find that eventually it is the only way they know how to behave. At that point, they lose trust, support of their peers, bosses, employees, and clients. We know people have an ongoing interest in how others perceive and evaluate them. Being perceived positively by others has benefits in an organizational setting. It might, for instance, help us initially to get the jobs we want, and once hired, It helps us to get favorable evaluations, great salary increases, and more rapid promotions. The process by which individuals attempt to control the impressions of others is called impression management. So, what type of people you think will engage in impression management? Yes, those with high self-monitors will engage a lot in impression management. High self-monitors are good at reading situations and molding their appearance and behaviors to fit each situation. Compared to low self-monitors, these people tend to present images of themselves that are consistent with their personalities, regardless of the beneficial or detrimental effects for them. Although there are no clear-cut ways to differentiate ethical from unethical politicking, there are some questions that we should consider. For example, what is the utility of engaging in politicking? Another question is how does the utility of engaging in the political behavior balance out harm or potential harm it will do to others? Finally, does the political activity conform to standards of equity and justice? Well, all these questions must be considered greatly before any action can be executed. Unfortunately, powerful people can become very good at explaining self-serving behaviors in terms of the organization's best interests. They can persuasively argue that unfair actions are really fair and just. Those who are powerful, articulate, and persuasive are most vulnerable to ethical lapses because they are more likely to get away with them. When faced with an ethical dilemma regarding organizational politics, try to consider whether playing politics is worth the risk and whether others might be harmed in the process. So in short, an effective manager accepts the political nature of organizations. Some people are more effective in using political behaviors, and they are more aware of the underlying politics and can manage impression management well. Those who are good at playing politics can be expected to get higher performance evaluations and hence larger salary increases and more promotions than those who are politically naive or inept. The politically astute are also more likely to exhibit higher job satisfaction and be better able to neutralize job stresses. And it's also very important to understand that political behaviors in organizations doesn't necessarily indicate a negative thing. In fact, many managers often believe that their political actions on behalf of their own departments are actually in the best interest of the organizations as a whole. In many instances, the survival of the organizations depends on the success of a department or coalitions of departments challenging a traditional but outdated policy or objective of the organizations. That is why an understanding of organizational politics as well as power is so essential for managers.